Good evening, everyone. This is Rebecca with Red True Crime. And if you've seen what the title is, that is what we're talking about tonight. Um, so, this is going to be a continue story about Cecil Brockman and actually Jason Edward Kohler. So, before I go into all of that, first let me say I appreciate everybody who supports this channel. And if you have not subscribed, please do so. And if you are new to the channel, this is a true crime channel. And we talk about old crime, new crime, local crime, international crime. We talk about it all. And we'll also be talking about Amari Jones as well, that case in Cleveland. That'll be the third thing we talk about. So let's get into it. So last week, a state representative by the name of Cecil Brockman was arrested and charged with mm, four things. And I'm going to put his picture here and you can see it for yourself. So that is what he was charged with. And, he had a medical emergency. So they had some delayed situations with him where he could not, go to court. And finally, they set a bond for him for $1,050,000. And more things have come out about this case because you know, he's been a representative for North Carolina since 2014. And apparently the child is 15 years old and he met this child when they were 14 on an app. What kind of app? I don't know. But he did meet up with this child in Atlanta and brought them back to North Carolina. And this child had been living with him for months. And when they arrested him and the child ended up in the hospital, which is what started this whole thing, I believe the child ran away. Cecil Brockman had called the police looking for him. They found him in the hospital, and just the ball went rolling from there. And from that, they had looked at their devices and found many, many videos, uh, very exploitive type videos. And this is what led to Mr. Brockman's arrest. So he is now sitting in the High Point jail, but I just realized he was arrested in High Point and he lives in High Point, but they just moved his hearing, which is in November when he goes back, I think November 12th, and it's gonna be in Greensboro. So it makes me wonder if they're gonna try to get him close to the federal courthouse because technically what he has done is the same thing that Puff Daddy was also charged with, which was the Mann Act, and that's a federal crime. So that's what I'm thinking is what's about to happen to him. But you tell me, because I was looking up the charges, what the, time limits and would be. And it depends on what they get him uh actually convicted of. So let me pull this back up. So pardon me. So he's charged with two counts of indecent liberties with a child. So if he actually gets any type of prison time, it would only be from 10 to 59 months. And that would be depending on prior criminal history and sentencing guidelines under North Carolina's structured sentencing laws. Now, he could face up to a $5,000 fine, and he is a lifetime registration on the sex offenders list, and it can never be expunged. And this would put restrictions on residence, employment, and travel. And what else did he say here? So, other consequences convictions cannot be expunged, potentially affecting employment, housing, and custody rights, and no mistake of age defense is available, and consent from the child is irrelevant. So, these are all things. Now, if the offender is under the age of 16, but at least 3 years older than the victim, it is charged under class one misdemeanor, punishable up to 120 days in jail and fines up to $1,000. Now, for the statutory RAPE, it gets a little bit different because it depends on age of the child and whatnot. Now, because this child is 15 years old, it does say, with a victim 15 or younger, that it's considered second degree, and he is looking at 19 years in prison on that. And he could get up to a $50,000 fine, and he's on the registration list for life, and there's no expungement. Same thing as, for this indecent liberties. So if they do away with the statutory case and he only gets convicted of indecent liberties, he's looking at like basically almost 5 years in jail. But hopefully, they get him for the full thing. Because from what I understand, the footage they found on the phones, on the devices, is pretty extreme. So, which brings me up to the question: are our laws too lax? Because I couldn't find anything on Cecil Brockman, his any previous charges or anything, but that doesn't mean he hasn't done anything in another state. And what gets me is, how did he go this long without being caught? I got to believe this kid is not the first child he's done this to. And it made me think of Jason Edward Kohler, this guy right here. Now, you might remember, I've talked about him before, was a gentleman that was featured on Bikers Against Predators page. They did a live stream where they had set up a dummy account, like a dummy social media account. And he thought, this guy in the picture, Jason Edward Kohler, thought he was talking to an 11-year-old girl. And it became very sexually explicit where he was trying to meet her and everything else. And once it got to that point, that's when these guys showed up at his house and they talked to him. They didn't threaten him or anything, but they talked to him. They got him to admit on camera that he had footage on his phone of minors in a sexual manner. And so right now he's been sitting in the High Point jail for months now under 15 different counts of third-degree sexual exploitation because he didn't touch anybody. That's what he's getting. Now, Cecil Brockman's a whole other story, but Jason Edward Kohler, that's what he's got. But what interesting thing is about Jason Edward Kohler is he's got a previous criminal history with this. He was convicted in Minnesota many years ago and did 10 years in prison for raping his own daughter. And it's actually in court documents and court notes that I've read that his probation officer, the prosecutor, and the judge all showed concern about him reoffending once he got out, that they did not feel like first they gave him like a minor sentence, like they put him on probation and he violated it and they threw his ass in jail for 10 years. But they even stated that they had concerns about him reoffending out there somewhere. And let me tell you, he reoffended because now once he got out in Minnesota, he moved to North Carolina and he's been here for several years. Now, I don't know if he's talked to anybody, touched any children. I don't know what he's done, but he was living with another sex offender in the same house, and he's under a lifetime registration too. My thing is, why was he ever allowed to leave the state of Minnesota? Because my thing, these guys should never be allowed to leave whatever state they committed the crime in. They should not be, because I don't think these records transfer across very quickly. And, they're starting all over again. Things don't get updated like they should. And they're out there doing God knows what. So I think that's one thing that should be done. Like somebody who um, offends like that, they should not be allowed to leave the state that they offended. They should be kept there. Personally, I don't think these guys should ever be allowed out in prison. I don't think they should be allowed out because I don't think they can be rehabbed. And I was talking to a coworker earlier today and we were talking about it. And she said she knew somebody who worked with people like him, like Cecil Brockman. And this person was of the impression that they could be helped. But if you look at the statistics, the reoffend rate is so high. And these guys they're just back out there. I mean, it's like you never get rid of that urge. So why take that chance and let them out like that? That's what I want to know. You know, I think personally they should be kept in prison for the lifetime. I think they should. And that's I'm not talking about, you know, ones who mess with kids. I'm talking about anybody who commits a sexual crime like that. They shouldn't be out because obviously they have poor impulse control and anger issues and control issues and sexual deviancy issues. So why would you let them out around normal people? That's what I want to know. But you all tell me, you know, you think these guys deserve a second chance? I mean, I don't think Jason Edward Kohler does because he already did 10 years and he obviously didn't learn his lesson that time. So, you tell me. I don't know. Like I said, this world is depraved on many levels. And then you've got the case up in Cleveland, that little girl, Amari Jones. There's been some back and forth and a lot of misinformation going out about that case. Sorry, had to adjust. Because I've been in the messaging boards and whatnot all weekend, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's these three white boys." No, that's wrong because it's not three white boys. It's two black boys and one black girl. You know, um, and the only reason I actually had somebody who called me out and said, "Oh, do your research." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they posted some TikTok video showing a teenager being pulled out of a police car. And I'm like, "Okay, one, the oldest of the offenders is 10 years old. That kid looked to be about 14." I said, "And two," I posted a screenshot of what the mother said, and she made it clear. Let's see if I can find it. She made it clear that these kids were black. And how do you argue with that? If the mother's saying it, how do you argue with that? So if anybody out there sees my back and forth about this is what I'm talking about because the mother's made it clear that all three kids were black and it's two boys and a girl that did this to her own child. And it's heartbreaking to see this kid, in the situation she was in because see if I can find a picture of her really quick. Like there she is. Look how sweet that child is. And this is what they did to her. They ripped the hair out of her scalp. They stripped her down. They beat her in the head. They strangled her. They assaulted her sexually. They urinated on her. They shoved dirt in her mouth and in her different body cavities. I mean, they left her for dead. They actually thought they had killed her. And the mother even felt that these kids, because of the behavior they had been exhibiting in the entire neighborhood, they felt that her daughter was most likely gonna be their first murder victim. And I can't say I disagree because, I mean, the depravity of what these kids shows no bounds whatsoever. And that's insane what they did to this kid. Absolutely insane. So, I mean, like I said, I applaud the mother for standing up for her child. I mean, to see her she is just so upset about just the lack of justice. But at the same time, this happened a month ago. And these kids, nothing's been charged on these kids. I mean, the parents of these children have already tried to, get them out of Dodge in the wake in middle of the night type thing. So, you know, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why hasn't social services popped in and said anything? Why have they not just taken these kids in for a psych eval to figure out what the hell's going on? Because obviously something's up. Something's up big time. And then the mother's getting, like, demands that, delete her posts about these kids. She's not named them, She's not named them at all. But do you think these children deserve, um do you think they deserve anonymity? Because they are minors and, but they are offenders. So the question is, do they deserve to be kept quiet? You know? So that's a good question. I mean, she's catching flack from everybody in the not the neighborhood, but the people whose kids did these things, saying our kids haven't been convicted of anything. No, they haven't. But my thing is the things they did to this 5-year-old, where did they see this? Where did they find out about this? Because no 8, 9, or 10-year-old should ever be able to do the things what they did to this little girl. So to me, that opens up the door of what's going on in that home for these kids to see this. Now, granted, it's 2 different homes, 2 different families, but I don't understand why these kids have not been taken for a forensic interview, why they have not been evaluated by a psychiatrist, forensic psychiatrist, because obviously something's not right here. Something's not right. And the fact that they can't even be charged with anything, like, the 10-year-old can be charged, but the 8 and 9-year-old can't be. There's no criminal charges whatsoever. That's why I keep saying this case with this child most likely is going to be a law-changing case because there's no way on earth a juvenile that commits a heinous crime like this should be able to just walk away scot-free. I'm not saying they need to be put in prison for the rest of their lives, but they definitely need to be evaluated psychologically. Because there's something going on. There's some major malfunction going on with these kids to do what they did. And I don't understand. Because I mean, look at this. Look at this child. How could you strangle her? How could you strip her naked? How could you hit her in the head with a rock and knock her unconscious? How could you shove dirt and sticks up into her body cavities? How could you do all that? How could you pee on her? How could you assault her in a sexual manner? How could you do any of these things? You're 8, 9, and 10 years old. How could you do that? What have you seen? What makes you think this is how you should behave? That just tells me these kids have no sense of morality, no sense of guilt or compassion or anything. And furthermore, there were neighbors who saw some stuff going on and they didn't intervene. Why not? That's the other thing. Why is no one intervening when they see something happen? I know I hear "Well, I was afraid I might get attacked." Okay, they're 8, 9, and 10 years old. I don't know what the hell they're gonna do to you, but, like, like the girl on the subway in, Charlotte, Irina, I can't think of her last name, but, Ukrainian woman that was stabbed by the crazy writer. Nobody went to her aid. He walked away, they just sat there as if nothing happened. What? She could have maybe had a chance to get to the hospital and be helped if somebody went over there and just put pressure on her neck, keep the bleeding from happening. But no, they just sat there and pretended nothing happened. And that's not okay. That's definitely not okay. I don't know. I don't know what the right or wrong answer is. I do know that in this country, we do a disservice to our children. We do a disservice to the mentally ill. And I don't know how to fix it. Something is wrong with society for children to think it's okay to do what they did to that little girl. That, for me, at the end of the day, what those 3 kids did is beyond disheartening and beyond upsetting. This child did not ask to be hurt like she was, and I do not understand why these kids thought it was okay to do what they did, and why these parents aren't turning their children in to get help. Forget the shame, forget, people knowing what your kids did, because they already know what your kids did. Get them help. If you can, get them help. Because Omri Jones did not deserve what happened to her. That child is gonna be forever I don't wanna use the word damaged, but she's gonna forever be changed because of what happened. I don't know if she'll ever come to terms with whatever happened to her at such a young age. Her mother's devastated. I would be too if it was my kid. I just don't understand. I just don't understand at all. Oh. So, on that note, I am gonna hop off here. Um, I will be back when I have more news of anything, but I just don't understand how these kids aren't in an institution somewhere being evaluated. I just don't. But this is Rebecca with Red True Crime. As I always say, be weird, be rude, be safe. And if you have an opportunity, please share, like, and comment on this channel if you like what I had to say. And I will be back with more news on other topics. But good night, everybody. And thank you for tuning in. And thanks for the support. Bye.